Hi, my name is Rodney Barbour, and I'm excited to be talking to you from the Verdin Organ Division in Cincinnati, Ohio. We're in the midst of a series where we're talking about pistons, which will help your organ playing and use the full range of sounds available on a pipe organ or a fine digital organ as well. Our first was the string sounds. Remember, we talked about solo sounds of all kinds and the accompaniment. Today we have another solo sound, but a very special one called the Cornet. This is a very classic sound that only the pipe organ can make. So we're going to take flute pitches 8, 4, 2 2/3, 2 1 3/5, and those are combined on this stop right here. And I want you to listen to this amazing traditional sound. That's pure Bach himself. Bach would have used a sound like that on his literature that he composed. And I could accompany that in a kind of different ways. I could use a diapason. Some people might choose to accompany that with flutes 8 and 4, so everything is a flute. Myself, I like that rule of opposites, so the listener can really easily track. But whether you choose flutes or whether you choose a diapason, that is totally up to you. And that's the beautiful thing about the organ. It makes me sound different than you, and you sound different than some others, is our individual choice of sounds, as long as we have a good musical reason to do that. Now, I also know that in Bach's day, when he played this Cornet on his organ, in that choir loft, there were little string orchestras and wind players. And so I could choose, if I wanted to be creative about this, to add some of those string players in by using my extra voices. So I am going to use my piston number 3, where I have already set this to have that exact same traditional Cornet, but I'm going to accompany it with a little orchestra. The secret to this, again, is adding those string sounds to traditional organ sounds. With those orchestral strings, I added my organ strings and I added an organ flute, again to provide dimension and depth to the sound. So everything that I've done here, even though I'm using these voices, which are not traditionally on an organ, the music result is traditional to what Bach would have heard in his choir loft. And I believe, again, if you're playing for a wedding, a funeral, a church service, this adds a level of expressiveness to the organ and to the sound that even enhance the Cornet and make it sound a lot more palatable and listenable to your listeners. So let's listen to that one more time. Now, I'm going to do something amazing different just by touching this control here, which is called a tremulant. All of a sudden, I'm going to take that very classic sound and turn this into a gospel sound by adding the tremulant to the Cornet. I'm going to use the same accompaniment. So all of a sudden, if you remember the great artist Paul Mickelson, that would be a sound that he might use, and that was his arrangement of Ivory Palaces, an old gospel tune. So isn't it amazing that we can make one change and change from this classical Bach into something that's a lot more evangelical for those who prefer that kind of music or are playing it that week in their worship service. Now, if you remember on piston number 2 that we talked about, I had that funny little harp. I have now put that harp from this keyboard, if you remember, down on this keyboard because the Cornet is here. So I can do that same trick I did on the other song, use my Cornet, just a little excitement at the end of that, a sound that people have not heard in this piece so far, a sound that gives them something to look forward to. The other thing is whole notes can be our enemies. And I want you to think about the whole note at the end of a song. Nothing is happening there, and people already have their minds away from what you are doing. So if we put that little harp arpeggio there at the end, it saves that sound for one last sound people have not yet heard that can draw them back in and help them to be excited and engaged with what you are doing. So again, just to review, our first piston was the string sounds on all keyboards. Our second was solo sounds like oboes and flutes and clarinets. Our piston here is this classic Cornet. So I want you to practice using it. I want you to find which keyboard your Cornet might be on the swell. It might be on the choir, or if you have a two-manual organ, it might be on the grate. Find the Cornet. If you have any questions about that, look it up on Google or get that book I talked about, The Organist's Manual, and you can look up these definitions and find exactly how to get that sound. Practice with that, set your piston, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you on another lesson coming up pretty soon. And this will be 2 choices for piston number 4. You're going to have to watch that video to see what they are. See you next time.